Hello and welcome to section 2. Congrats on making it through the introductory stage. In this section, we're going to be building components with React and mastering the fundamentals along the way. These fundamentals include the concept of components, props, and state. No complex React application, or indeed any complex web application, can be built without these. The focus of this section will be on thinking about reusable component architecture, crafting forms and control flows, and local application state. Things are going to be more involved as we go on, with a lot of more coding in each video. Now remember, you can always follow along with the code, and the course repository is maintained via Git, so you can find the code for each video as a specific tagged Git commit. I also encourage you to pause the videos and code out your own ideas as they come. So, what are we doing today? Well, we're building a reusable list component for a job board app. Here's a design I received as a reference for what we're building. Now, dissecting this design file, I can clearly identify that this is some sort of list container. And it comes with these individual card items, each of which has these sub-properties such as title, company name, location, and salary. You can think of each of these elements as a separate component, all of them forming one complete whole. If we can separate every part into its own component, then we will have a library of reusable components that we can mix and match as our application grows. So let's start by first practicing a few tricks with our counter components. It would be cool if these referred to individual things, such as fruits for example. And it would be very cool if we could render as many counters as we need to have. And indeed we can. Remember, this is just JavaScript, so we can use a function such as map to iterate through our array of fruits and return an array of counter components. Now I'm going to add two things to a counter component, a key and a name. These are called props. Allow me to segue into a short explanation. So, you know how functions have arguments? Well, for example, here we have a function that will return a formatted full name based on two arguments. But do we really need to create it like this? We could also have a single argument, something that's called a named parameter object. Now, the object itself has keys or properties that we can use. This is essentially what you're doing when you provide these key value pairs to your components in React. You're creating a single prop object with all of the keys you specify and their respective values. And remember, since this is JavaScript, you don't have to provide exact values. You can also reference variables or perform function calls in the declaration. So here you can see that we are creating a name property which will have the value of our fruit names. But what is this key property? We'll talk about it later, but for now you should know that it's like an identifier for your dynamically created components. It has to be unique to ensure that React will properly render and manage each of the counter components. Let's jump into the counter component and add the name property next to the counter value. Alright, that was a neat example, but let's get back to our job list. I'm going to cheat a bit, as I already have the component prepared for you here. Let me add in. Looks pretty cool, but as you can see, all of the values are hard-coded. Here's a look at the CSS if you're interested as well. I'm not covering the styling aspects just yet, as they're not relevant to us right now. Now, what I also have prepared is this file, which contains a list of jobs we'd like to display dynamically inside of our app. This is our stand-in for an actual API. I'm going to go ahead and import this to my app.js component. and I'll use our array iteration technique to render all of them. I'll be using the ID property as our key since it's unique. If you don't have access to a truly unique property, then use the element index like we did with the counter example. When an element is created, React pulls off the key property and stores the key directly on the returned element. Oh, and one more note. Even though it may look like the key attribute is part of props, it cannot be referenced with this.props.key. React uses the key automatically while deciding which children elements to update. There is no way for a component to inquire about its own key, and it really shouldn't even try to do that. Alright, so we have a bunch of elements on the screen, but really they all look the same. We want to get all the data from inside the jobs array into our components, and this is where we'll be using props. I'm going to pass each property down to the job item component and watch as the hard-coded values update with the dynamic ones. Now, while I like this explicit way of naming things, here's a neat little way to cut out all the writing and simply pass down all the properties of an object to a React component. Hey, hooray for new JavaScript syntax. So now we have a list of elements, but not really a reusable list component. Let me show you this design pattern that will get you thinking in React. I'll create a list.js file and move all of our list rendering logic there. I'm going to have this component accept a single property called items and have it do all of the rendering. Let's verify it works. And sure enough it does. But there is a problem with this. It's not completely reusable. While we can render any list, we can only render it with a single type of list item. Apps usually have lots of various lists, and it's good to support all of these with a single, well-designed component. Let's do that next by using another prop, an item element. Now you can see I'm passing the component itself as a property. Let's verify that this can work with different components. I'll create a simple job element item. that only displays the title of the ad. And now that I imported it and switched it up, it will work as well, and it's receiving the same props as the other component. So, once again, I highly encourage you to pause here and play around. Create more complex list elements with more data and have fun with React.